This week on Jersey Matters, a backup at America's ports has caused a national supply chain problem, but not in New Jersey. We talk with Beth Ann Rooney from the Port Authority. So now you shouldn't take an aspirin a day? We get the latest from cardiologist Brett Seelove, and a plea from a veteran who desperately needs a kidney transplant to stay alive. Hello and welcome to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. We have seen video of the backlog of ships at America's ports and the empty shelves caused by the disruption in the supply chain. So we checked in with the Port Authority for New York and New Jersey to find out how they're doing, and we got a surprising answer. Here's Deputy Director Beth Ann Rooney. Thanks so much for your time today. We've been seeing these stories on the national news from Los Angeles, Long Beach, from Savannah, Georgia, about real supply chain problems at the ports, ships backed up offshore. So we wanted to get a health check on what's going on in New Jersey. How are we doing?
We are doing remarkably well as compared to our counterparts on the West Coast and in the South Atlantic. Right now, actually all this week, we have had just one vessel offshore at anchor waiting to get in at a time. And the average time in which those vessels wait year to date in 2021 is just 1.5 days.
So you're not doing any worse than you normally do. You're doing as well as you normally do. Let's put it that way.
You know, on the ship and vessel side and discharging the cargo from the vessels, we're doing as normal as we have been doing for as long as I can remember. We do certainly have some issues when it comes to cargo that is sitting on the container terminals longer. There are concerns with the chassis that the containers sit on being out on the street longer. And then that makes for the truck driver's experience a little more difficult in delivering that cargo because there aren't enough wheels to go around. And then when there are wheels, many of the warehouses and distribution centers are filled to the rafters. So we have to wait for the domestic trucks to deliver the cargo from the warehouse and distribution centers to the retail stores and the fulfillment centers. What's
causing some of the delay getting the product from port?
Well, so we're looking through August. The Port of New York and New Jersey has handled 28% more cargo than we did last year in 2020. And last year was still a record year in spite of the pandemic. So 28% more cargo. The marine terminals and the waterways have the capacity to handle that volume, but the rest of the supply chain hasn't had the time and the opportunity to build the necessary capacity to handle a 28% growth in a very short period of time. So that is, we need sufficient trucks, we need sufficient truck drivers, we need sufficient rail, we need sufficient rail operators, we need sufficient chassis, warehouse space, warehouse workers. So it all starts with the fact that the shippers and the amount of cargo that's coming into the country is 30% more. And that's not a figure that is unique to New York and New Jersey. Our counterparts on the West Coast and in the South Atlantic are seeing numbers very similar to what ours are.
So in your case, at least, I don't know what's happening specifically in Savannah and in Los Angeles, although I've heard reports. But in your case, would you say it's not a problem of having, I shouldn't say enough truck drivers or enough workers, but if you had the same loads you had last year, you'd be fine? It's just the increase in the goods coming in. It's not a decrease in the number of workers.
So that is an excellent question and a really important point. So we in New York, New Jersey have not seen a decrease in the number of truck drivers. There has been a turnover in truck drivers. In fact, we have seen an increase. but that increase is only about 2%. So when you look at a 2% increase in truck drivers and a 20% increase in cargo activity, there's clearly a disconnect.
Do you have contact with your counterparts in Los Angeles and in Savannah? What do they tell you?
We do. You know, they look, we're all struggling. We're all struggling. You know, every port is different. You know, there's an old adage in our industry anyway, that if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. You know, our labor situation in New York is very different than it is in the South Atlantic and very different than it is on the West Coast. Our longshore labor generally are hired and assigned to a particular facility, you know, 99% of the time. Whereas on the West Coast, they hire out of a hiring hall every day. So a worker could go to a different terminal from one day to another. Whereas our guys and gals are going to the same terminal most of the time. So they get used to the processes, they get used to the equipment. They're experts in the equipment that is in their home terminal. So it's a very different situation from port to port.
But do they tell you specifically, this is our problem? This is why we're having a problem?
Again, we all have the same problems. Volume is 30% more than what they expected to have this year. They too have warehouses and distribution.
But you're handling it. You don't have ships offshore. You're handling it. Are you being diplomatic? Is that what's going on?
No, definitely not being diplomatic. Look, we want the cargo that's going into the West Coast and the South Atlantic to come to New York and New Jersey. I'm confident that we can handle it. But look, I'm not working in those ports. I can't tell you, exactly why they're having the problems that they're having.
But they're seeing the same increase you're seeing. So they are seeing the same increase.
Yeah, so the Port of Savannah through August is 30%. Long Beach is 29%. LA is 30%, and we were 28%. So we're all on par with each other in terms of the increase in cargo.
Proud that you seem to be handling it better, but it's New Jersey pride.
It is New Jersey pride, and it's the men and women who are on the front lines, from the longshoremen to the truck drivers, terminal management, and everybody through the supply chain. Like I said, they have not missed a beat. It's not without its challenges, but we really, have been across the Port of New York, New Jersey, been doing an incredible job for the last 19 months.
Well, thank you very much for doing that job.
Thank you, Larry. We appreciate it.
We appreciate your time. Thanks again. Beth Ann Rooney, Deputy Director of the Port Authority. Still to come on Jersey Matters, a big election in New Jersey is coming up. We'll check on the biggest races next. Welcome back. November 2nd is Election Day, and there are some big races in New Jersey. We talked about those races with one of our favorite political experts, Dr. Ben Dworkin, Director of the Rowan Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship. All right, Ben, as always, thanks for your time. Everybody in the state and many people in the country are focused on this gubernatorial race. How do you see it playing out now with 2 weeks out?
With 2 weeks out, what we're seeing is that each side is focused on two things. One is their closing argument. For Cheddarelli, this is a referendum on Phil Murphy's first term. He wants a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's less about him and more about trying to get enough people who don't like Phil Murphy to come out and vote. For Phil Murphy, the way he wants to frame the last 2 weeks is not as a referendum, but as a choice. Me or Jack Cheddarelli. And he's trying to raise the distinctions and the contrast between the two of them and their respective parties. We have a significant Democratic voter advantage in New Jersey. There are more than 1 million more registered Democrats than registered Republicans in the state. And so for Murphy, he needs to get his side activated, because that margin doesn't mean much if those people don't come out and actually vote. So you see Murphy trying to create this as a choice moving forward, moving back, that kind of rhetoric. You see Cettarelli talking about it's a referendum. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And therefore you should blame the incumbent. That's part of what's happening the last 2 weeks. And the other part is just turnout. Each side is putting their boots on the ground and trying to drag all of their supporters to vote. We have typically in the last few gubernatorial elections had around 38, 39% turnout of all registered voters. The higher that number goes, the better it is for Murphy.
Now, I was listening to Karl Rove, who I know is biased and he's pro-Republican, has been a Republican all his life. But he said something interesting because he does know how to read elections and campaigns. And he said what we should be paying attention to in both Virginia and New Jersey is the early turnout, the early voting. And the early voting in both places has been running under what it has in the past. And if it keeps running under, he believes, and again, it's Karl Rove, he believes that's bad news for the Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree that lower turnout helps the Republicans. Higher turnout will help the Democrats. And that's why the Democrats are bringing in all these big guns. You have Barack Obama and Senator Amy Klobuchar, Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady. Lots of people are coming in to try and raise the energy level, to try and help make the case and to get the Democratic numbers actually to vote. The early vote in New Jersey is a little bit different than Virginia because this is the first year New Jersey is going to have early voting, where you can go in person to a number of different locations in your county where you're registered and cast a ballot in person prior to Election Day, November 2nd. That's going to start on October 23rd. Now, we've had no real experience with in-person.
You mean, I want to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You mean early in-person voting. We've had early voting.
That's what I'm saying, is this early in-person voting. Right. Previously, you wanted to vote early, you had to vote by mail. There were ways of, sending in getting your ballot and submitting it prior to Election Day. But now we have in-person early voting for the first time. And no one is quite sure which party is going to be able to use that to their advantage just yet.
Many people say, and this has worked out this way in the past, that the off-year gubernatorial elections in Virginia and New Jersey are a precursor, a bellwether for what happens in the midterms. Do you see it playing out that way?
Not necessarily. I think the Democrats are understood historically that in 2022, which is the first midterm of a Democratic administration, they're bound to lose seats in the Congress. The fact that there's redistricting going on and Republican legislatures are able to probably gerrymander a couple extra seats there will contribute to the fact, I guess not, I won't say the fact, but the presumption that Democrats are going to lose control of the House. So I'm not sure what happens in New Jersey is going to affect the things that we already expect to see come 2022. You could have two Democratic wins in Virginia and in New Jersey. It doesn't mean that the Democrats are going to win the House in 2022. They're more likely to lose it simply because of other trends.
I want to move on to other things like some of the elections. The gubernatorial election takes up all the oxygen. Some of the elections that we should be paying attention to that are big elections in New Jersey that are not getting covered as much.
Yeah, look, the entire state legislature is up for election, and there are 40 legislative districts. Overwhelmingly, these districts are either safely Republican or safely Democratic, and that means the real fight comes in the primary. So what we're looking at in November are really 3 legislative districts where there's going to be a tremendous amount of money. We're talking hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, millions of dollars spent to just win these seats between all the both campaigns and the independent expenditures that come in on behalf of those campaigns. What we're looking at is 3 districts in particular. District 2, which is centered in Atlantic County around Atlantic City. You have Vince Polistina, who was an assemblyman and is the Republican, and he's trying to take the Senate seat from Chris Brown, Chris Brown has retired, and the Democratic current assemblyman, Vince Mazzeo, is going at it. We're going to see several $million spent on this one Atlantic County state Senate seat. You move up the road a bit, and you look in Burlington County, District 8. The incumbent, Dawn Adiego, the Democrat, who used to be a Republican but switched parties a couple of years ago, is running against the current Assemblywoman, former sheriff in Burlington County, Jean Stanfield. This race is going to have easily, I think, over $5 million spent on just winning that one seat. The third race that we should be watching is in District 16. In District 16, again, you have an open seat. Longtime State Senator Kip Bateman is leaving office. You have Andrew Zwicker, one of the current Democratic assemblymen, running for the state Senate. And you have Mike Pappas, a former congressman, who's now trying to get back into politics by running for the state Senate on the Republican side. Again, these are the most competitive races, and they're the ones that we'll be most interested in seeing how they turn out come election night.
Well, Ben, as always, you're very informative. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you after the election, okay?
I look forward to it, Larry. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Ben Dworkin from Rowan University, next on Jersey Matters.
A decision to vaccinate kids ages 5 through 11 against COVID-19 could be coming in just a few weeks. And coming up next, we'll give you a look inside a pediatric trial happening right here in the Garden State.
Welcome back. The FDA is still considering an emergency request by Pfizer to okay its COVID-19 vaccine for children ages 5 to 11. And as Jersey Matters' Jennifer Marin now reports, trials for children are still taking place at the Robert Wood Medical Center. Jen.
Larry, the Rutgers trial enrolled 135 kids ages 6 months to 11 years old. But right now, all eyes are on the 5 to 11 age group, and a decision to vaccinate them could be coming in just a couple of weeks. 10-year-old Maya Huber is rolling up her sleeve in the hopes of helping children across the country.
Relax your arm, just let it hang. Good.
She's one of the 135 New Jersey children enrolled in Pfizer's pediatric vaccine trial at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School.
When she found out that she could participate, possibly get herself vaccinated, and then actually help, get this approved for other kids, she was like, I'm all in.
The trial, which lasts 2 years and began in June of 2021, is studying children ages 6 months to 11 years old.
Over 1,000 families responded for those 100 to 200 slots. So we had tremendous interest.
Dr. Sunanda Gore is overseeing the trial.
The bulk of the activity of the study will be in the first 6 months. So every kid gets their 2 doses of vaccine or placebo, and then at 6 months everyone gets unblinded, which means they find out whether they got the vaccine or the placebo.
After consulting with Maya's pediatrician, Nisha says the family felt safe entering the trial.
The setup at Rutgers was fantastic. They were very kind, they were very gentle, they included her in the entire process all the way through.
The process is split up into 3 parts.
At the first visit, they get the first shot, and the second shot is 3 weeks later. They come back for that visit. That's a shorter visit because there's no blood draw at that visit. And then the next visit is at 6 months.
After the first shot, all children are asked to keep track of how they feel.
They get a e-diary, and they enter every day their symptoms, anything they feel. Could be a sneeze, they put it in. It's very closely monitored.
The children receive 1/3 of the dose that adults receive. And according to Dr. Gar, Pfizer's data thus far shows the vaccine produced a favorable antibody response in the 2,000 children enrolled in the trial nationwide. And as for side effects,
we have not seen anything. In fact, we have not seen much of any any significant side effects other than local swelling or a little bit of fever.
Back on October 7th, Pfizer and BioNTech submitted an application to the FDA asking for emergency use authorization of the vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11. It's exciting news for Nisha's family.
We can't wait to hear what they say, see if it gets approved. As soon as it gets the approval, we were told that they would disclose whether Maya had the vaccine, and if not, they would invite us to come to Rutgers to get the vaccine.
Federal regulators, the FDA and CDC will meet over the next 2 weeks to weigh the benefits of giving the shots to children. The Biden administration announced that in preparation for an FDA and CDC approval, they've already purchased enough vaccine doses to vaccinate all 28 million children in the 5 to 11 age group. For now, reporting in New Brunswick for Jersey Matters, I'm Jennifer Marin.
All right, thank you, Jen. Next on Jersey Matters.
I'm Phil Andrews, and coming up on Jersey Matters, I'll tell you what this was all about.
The last thing we need is the government getting involved in your life and telling you what you need to do.
Welcome back to Jersey Matters. School employees and state workers in New Jersey must now show proof that they are fully vaccinated to show up to work or undergo regular testing. And as Jersey Matters' Phil Andrews now tells us from Trenton, that has stirred up some angry protest. Phil.
Yeah, Larry, it was about 1,000 people who showed up here in Trenton earlier this week to protest Governor Murphy's mask and vaccine mandates, and many of those in attendance were school teachers.
Murphy must go! Murphy must go! Murphy must go!
It's not even about us anymore. It's not about us. Even though we're here about the testing mandates, yes, we're educators, it's our jobs, public employees, but it's about them. It's bigger than us. It's bigger than a job. I'm sorry, it's bigger than a pension and a paycheck.
I am being singled out, again, despite being absolutely no risk to others, for only one reason: an ongoing attempt to coerce me into accepting an injection, a questionable medical procedure for an illness that has a greater than 99% survival rate for most of the population.
I teach kindergarten, and I am here today because I am suing the state of New Jersey. I never thought at my age, 49 years old, that I ever would have to say that.
In the case that I filed today, we're suing Governor Murphy, we are suing the Office of Legislative Services, and we're suing the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court.
Now, you should know that at one point, Wiefer switched from the Democratic to Republican Party, and actually earlier this year had considered a run for this year's gubernatorial race before pulling out. With that said, what is Governor Murphy's response to Wiefer's lawsuit?
I won't comment on any of these suits, but that's at least conceptually would be my answer about the group that you mentioned that was suing us. You know, I'll tell you, when you've got a vaccination mandate with a testing option, I think that's a reasonable, and in schools everyone's required to wear a mask. I think, not happily, but that's the package. I don't think that's unreasonable.
I think that if we are going to do testing, we should also be testing those who are vaccinated, because as we all know now with this new variant, we're finding that breakout cases, if you want to call it that, or cases among the vaccinated are also increasing. So I think you need to, kind of be testing everybody or testing when it makes sense.
A sentiment echoed by some of those at this week's rally. But while Murphy thinks that getting tested weekly is a viable opportunity for those who refuse a vaccination, some of these folks disagree.
I wake up early to go to my job 5 days a week. Now, because of this mandate, I have to get up even earlier. I have to wait in line to get a swab shoved up my nose. Sometimes so far, it makes my nose bleed. I mean, I just don't understand it. We know that this is not fair.
What the state is forcing people to do is extremely degrading. It's very degrading, and it forces people to line up to have something put into their nose that is causing them physical pain.
And of course, we will keep an eye on these lawsuits against the governor and other state lawmakers and let you know how they are progressing through the system. In Trenton for Jersey Matters, I'm Phil Andrews.
Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. If you take a baby aspirin every day to prevent heart attack or stroke, the United States Preventative Services Task Force says you may want to rethink that decision. We get the latest now from Dr. Brett Seelove, cardiologist at Hackensack Meridian Health.
Hi, doctor. Thanks for your time. I want to talk to you about aspirin. I think there's a lot of people out there that are still taking baby aspirins every day to avoid heart attack or stroke. And now they're being told that may not be a good idea. Where is this coming from?
Yeah, it gets conflicting, right? And over the last few days, aspirin has been this little dirty word. It used to be this game changer, and now it has this little negative connotation to it. So let me just put it into context if I can. Essentially, the task force is a 16-member volunteer group of physicians that orchestrate all the data and come to a consensus to our population for their health recommendations. So 5 years ago, they essentially said that if you're over 50 and have some risks, you should consider being on aspirin. If you're over 60, it's a discussion with your physician. And what happened over the last 5 years, there's this onslaught of data that aspirin has some risks, and those risks are pertain to bleeding in your brain, bleeding in your stomach, not just nuanced bleeding. And they seem to mitigate the benefit of aspirin. And that's really where we're at right now, that discussion has to really change regarding the benefit of aspirin versus the risk of bleeding. The new recommendations talk about if you're 60 and above, the benefit essentially is off-weighed by that risk of bleeding. And if you're between 40 and 59 and you have risks for heart disease, diabetes, etc., again, one should have a discussion with their physician. This doesn't talk about people that are on aspirin due to prior stroke, prior heart attack, etc. This is people that are new to the drug to prevent heart disease and stroke.
So if somebody's taking an aspirin every day right now, they should stop?
Yeah, that's a great question, Larry. To be honest with you, my phones have been off the hook because of that, question. The answer that I give people is do not stop any medication unless it's under supervision. There may be a reason why your physician has you on aspirin that's not part of the task force guidelines. Maybe it doesn't have to do with your heart risk. Maybe you had a prior mini stroke, blood clots, etc. So that discussion should happen on an individualized basis. Again, this is a general consensus for the population that if you're on aspirin, it deserves a phone call to your physician should you stay on it. If you are on it for, again, prior stroke, prior heart attack, prior stent, the answer is unequivocally you should continue it.
Is aspirin dangerous for the rest of us? I mean, it seems like such a safe drug.
Yeah, the lifetime risk of aspirin really takes shape based on the data about bleeding. So if you took an aspirin for pain, for example, for your knee pain and whatnot, it's a higher dose of aspirin. We're talking about an 81 milligram tablet of aspirin. And over time, it can irritate the stomach lining and even increase the risk of bleeding in the brain. So aspirin in and of itself on an as needed basis is probably not too harmful for you, but cumulatively over years or decades, it can cause harm.
Are some of the other pain drugs safer than aspirin?
Regarding bleeding, yes. Some of the other medications that you're probably referring to Motrin, Advil, Naproxen, those also increase your risk for bleeding. I guess what we talk about this, sheds light on a broader question I think you're alluding to is that, what we're putting in our body definitely has ramifications. Yes, there are benefits, but there are also potential risks. And the other thing I would tell you about this little thing called aspirin, it doesn't do anything to blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. Those are the things, when you look at heart disease, almost 800,000 to 900,000 people have a new event a year. 80% of that or so is deemed preventable. Aspirin doesn't have that data behind it. It won't prevent 80% of heart attack or stroke. And it has risk, and those risks are real, and those risks are bleeding. So, I think the discussion when it comes to your physician about aspirin is, should I or should not be on this? And how do I really focus on preventing events? And the answer really isn't aspirin.
There are some times you should be taking aspirin, right?
Oh, for sure. Again, aspirin is an oldie but a goodie for sure. I mean, it has tremendous benefits. It is a mild blood thinner, so it decreases the risk of blood clots, which is the precursor for heart attack and stroke. So those people that are at highest risk and are under 60, we would really consider it based on a discussion about their risk of bleeding. So if you have low risk of bleeding but high risk for heart disease, diabetes, 55-year-old, et cetera, it's something that we still highly consider and is highly beneficial. The problem is the 75-year-old man or woman who has no known heart disease or stroke, the older you get, the higher that risk. The problem is we used to give it out like water until we realized that the risk of bleeding as you get older, that risk essentially matches the benefit of the drug. So yes, it is definitely a part of our armamentarium of medications. It's just not for everybody.
Wonderful. You've been extremely informative. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Anytime. Pleasure to be here.
Dr. Brett Seelove, cardiologist at Hackensack Meridian Health. Next on Jersey Matters, a South Jersey veteran needs a new kidney to stay alive. We'll talk with him next. "14-year-old Sir Darius Brown of Lawrenceville found a cute and stylish way to help shelter animals get adopted. Darius is the owner of Bow and Paws, a non-profit bow tie store for cats and dogs. Since Darius was 8 years old, he has made 1,000 bow ties in an effort to make animals more noticeable in the adoption process. So far, he has helped 1,500 cats and dogs find a new home. Welcome back to Jersey Matters. 4,000 people in New Jersey are on a waiting list for a life-saving transplant. We got a letter from one such person asking for help, a South Jersey veteran, and well, how could we say no? Here's our interview with Mark Clayman from Burlington County.
Mark, thanks for taking some time to talk to us. I'm very sorry about what you're going through. Could you explain to us why you need a transplant?
Absolutely. Well, in 2009, when all this started, I wound up having a partial nephrectomy. I had a cancer. And after that, over the years, my kidney function has been deteriorating. To the point where it got about 2.5 years ago, I still work full time, and I had kidney failure while at work. I just shut down. So getting to the hospital, I had to go on dialysis initially, and doing it at home. And so, I mean, but it's still even with dialysis, it gets every day or every few months, it gets worse. And I'm just really in need of my health basically is going down. I've been very active with my wife and grandchildren. And now I'm finding I just don't have the strength even now, and even in fact, it got so bad with doing dialysis at home, I just had to go into the center and doing that 3 days a week.
No, what is your prognosis? What have they told you? You need a kidney transplant.
I definitely need a transplant. Otherwise the prognosis is I'm not going to have a good quality of life, and it's not going to last a long time. I'm in my mid 70s now, and the hospitals are also working on a time restraint, because you get too old and they don't want to provide you a donor. So I'm reaching out through my advocate, through Donna Tassad, and through a military organization, and my company has been really terrific and doing a feature on me for Veterans Day, and just trying to help me somewhere around the country. Anybody who doesn't even need to be a match. There used to be where you had to have the same blood type. Now it work for anybody under the sharing network. So I would just love to have a chance to see some more of my grandchildren get older and walk down the aisle with them. And, and also I'm taking care of my wife. My wife has mesothelioma. So she's been battling cancer and getting chemo treatments, and she's got to go in for surgery again in another month or two. So trying to be healthy around for her to be a caregiver.
You talk about your service.
Well, I enlisted in 1966 in the U.S. Army, and served 10 years, 5 years in infantry. Then I decided I had enough of the mud and the dirt, and was able to get myself into working a nice, clean life in an office for 5 years. So I served a total of 10 years, and proud to have done it. And I'm really glad I did. And it's been a life experience for me for everything from my marriage to my raising my kids and my grandchildren. It's been, it always stays with me.
Yeah, and you've given to your country, and you're looking.
And I still carry my dog tags with me.
Tell people how they can help. What can they do? Where do they call?
All right. Well, and that would be so appreciated. They can either contact Hackensack Memorial and call them. The contact there is Susan Lobalbo, L-O capital B-A-L-B-O. And her phone number is 551-996-2608. I'm also registered at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. And just so to give you that information, her name is Jean Berthet, and her email is jean.berte@jefferson.edu. And you can contact her, and she'll work with everybody to help.
Well, sir, thank you so much for all you did for the country, and I pray for you. I hope this goes well for you, and I hope that we are able to help.
Burlington County veteran Mark Klayman. Still to come on Jersey Matters.
Election Day is less than 2 weeks away. How are New Jerseyans planning on casting their vote? Find out next, coming up on Jersey Matters.
Welcome back to Jersey Matters. As we mentioned earlier, Election Day in New Jersey is less than 10 days away. But there is something new this year, early in-person voting. In fact, polls are open right now. So Jersey Matters' Kimberly Kravitz traveled across the state to find out how people are planning to cast their ballots. Kimberly.
With early voting, mail-in ballots, and your traditional in-person voting, New Jerseyans have more ways and days to cast their ballot this year for the upcoming November 2nd election.
Brand new this year, never before occurred in New Jersey. It has occurred in other states, early voting.
So how do New Jerseyans plan on casting their vote this election day?
Yes, I definitely plan to go out on election day. I do see the prudence and the urgency behind mail-in ballots. Nothing against the mail-in ballot process. Me personally, it's just an in-person thing for me.
I have mailed my ballot already.
Well, it's easy because it fits my schedule. I just fill it out and I just mail it in. And so it's just easy.
I go in and I vote in
Is it like a
person.
generational thing? Some people like to just, go in and do it, or then some people
Yeah, I feel like I live super close to my voting spot, so it's super easy. I just quickly walk in. There's like no lines mostly because most people are mailing it in, so it's quick. Yeah.
This year, for the very first time, voters will have the option to vote as early as 9 days out in New Jersey.
And so we want to emphasize to all voters that starting Saturday, October 23rd through Halloween, October 31st, in any county in the state of New Jersey, you can vote in person on a machine. Hours are 10 in the morning till 8 at night, 10 to 6 on Sunday. And electronic poll books. No more paper bound books. You'll sign in on a pad like you would doing a credit card transaction. So new equipment, another option to vote.
The two candidates for governor are running on completely different issues. So what is motivating voters for this election year?
Absolutely, taxes lowered. That's the big issue, is taxes. Our taxes are too high. So, and I'd like to see them go down.
Sure thing. And every vote counts, so.
Yep, and hopefully mine will count too.
Are there issues that you care about? What's motivating you?
I'd like to see some issues addressed regarding different coronavirus long hauler assistance, things of that nature. I know that it's an evolving epidemic, but I also know that a lot of people are suffering from months-long durations of symptoms, so I'd like to see a little bit more funding and advocacy toward that.
Generally speaking, a liberal agenda, which I think we're sort of on. So not so much change at this point.
What's motivating you to go out and vote this year? What would you like to see for New Jersey?
I'd like to keep New Jersey the way it's going right now. I mean, I do like our governor, and so, and I want to make sure he stays.
So will voters be asked to mask up at the polls?
The governor just issued a order on this, and poll workers will be wearing masks, but voters do not need to. It's optional to them. Obviously, people have been vaccinated this year. We had no vaccination last year at all.
And of course, voters are welcome to cast their ballots in person at their assigned polling place on November 2nd. The polls will be open from 6 a.m. through 8 p.m. Reporting for Jersey Matters, I'm Kimberly Kravitz.
All right, thank you, Kimberly. My commentary is next. On this upcoming election day, the eyes of the nation will be on two races, the race for governor of New Jersey and the race for governor of Virginia. Both states hold off-year elections, which simply means there's no major federal election on the ballot. And the elections in both states are used to get a political temperature check as we head into next year's midterm election, when every House seat and 34 Senate seats are on the ballot. In New Jersey, incumbent Democratic Governor Phil Murphy is being challenged by Republican Jack Ciattarelli, a former assemblyman. And in Virginia, the Democrat is former Governor Terry McAuliffe, who is being challenged by Glenn Youngkin, a businessman, a former CEO of a private equity firm. In both races, the Democratic candidate had a healthy lead in the summer. But polls show that both races have tightened substantially. In Virginia now, the polls show it's a tie. The national parties are watching both of these races very closely for trends, not only in voting, but in issues. And an issue in both of these races is schools, school curriculum, and school mask mandates. For instance, in Virginia, the Republican Youngkin has been pounding the Democrat Terry McAuliffe over a comment he made in the last debate about schools.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
After that comment, the race then tied in the polls, and Youngkin's rallies now have overflow crowds. Nationally, the Republicans are taking notice that focusing on schools may be a winning issue, as we've seen at packed school board meetings across the country. Parents are passionate about what their kids are being taught and mask mandates. And the Democrats have noticed a voter backlash when race is used to attack a Republican opponent.
Do we stand with our sacred democracy, or do we stand with Confederate flags and white supremacists and a pack of lies? Do we stand, do we continue to make the tough...
That was Republican Governor Murphy in the final debate between him and Republican Chitterelli. There is no question that President Biden's sinking approval numbers and the problems the nation is having has an effect on these midterm elections and will have even more of an effect on next year's midterms. Most of the national media focus has been on Virginia because it's a red state that is turning blue. As a matter of fact, for the first time in decades, they have a Democratic governor, a Democratic legislature, and 2 Democratic senators. New York Magazine, in a headline, asks if it's time for Democrats to panic about Virginia and the midterms. Politico answers they're already worried about Virginia. And the Washington Post, in a headline, says they are worried about a possible cascade of election troubles because of Virginia. New Jersey is not getting the same amount of national attention because even though the race is tightening, New Jersey is very much a blue state with 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans. Still, off-year elections can come down to 2 things: turnout and passion. In 2017, when Phil Murphy was elected governor, only 38% of registered voters came out to vote. In 2013, when Republican Governor Chris Christie won re-election, it was only 35%, which is why the 2009 New Jersey gubernatorial election may be the one to look at, with incumbent Democratic Governor John Corzine being challenged by Republican former U.S. Attorney Chris Christie. It was Republican passion in that election that fueled a 47% turnout, and Chris Christie won. As it was in 2009, it very well may be in 2021. There was a brand new Democratic president, Barack Obama, and a Democratic-controlled House and Senate that pushed through a controversial health care bill nicknamed Obamacare, and that stoked a Republican backlash at the polls. The very next year, in 2010, the Republicans picked up 63 seats in the House. They won 7 Senate seats and won 6 governor's races. Now you understand why the Democrats are so worried about this year's governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, which is why the Democrats aren't taking any chances dispatching former President Obama and other top Democrats to both states to get out the Democratic vote. So yes, the focus of the country, and certainly everybody in Washington, D.C., will be on Virginia and New Jersey on Election Day, November 2nd. Republican wins could be an early forecast of a red wave coming to Washington in 2022, something the Democrats are desperately trying to stop. I'm Larry Menti. We'll talk again soon.